Well, to kind of give folks introduction, at least those that are tuning in that haven't seen my previous video, I go by Blinksys. I joined the Air Force in 2011, and for 5 years, I worked as a geospatial intelligence targeteer. I'll get into like the specifics a little bit later. For 2 of those years, I actively targeted ISIS. So that's a bit what of our previous video is about. It was my deployment. So to start things off, yeah, the previous, or at least part one of the story, was when I worked the dynamic targeting cell when I was deployed out forward. Dynamic targeting is dealing with targets that are usually on the move or that can move. So you have like checkpoints, vehicles, personnel, and I believe at one point we also talked about ducks. Yes, ducks were
Yes.
a target. If you go back to the previous video, you can get more on that. And then some of the challenges that not only I faced, but others within our community faced as well. In my case, I have PTSD from some of the events, and we were also able to deal with some of the trauma and some of the missions that we were doing by pranking each other, playing stupid games. But all those details can be found in part one. So please feel free to watch that. Yeah, so there are quite a few questions from the previous video that I would like to answer. No, in no particular order. I literally just copied and pasted everything. I'm like, yep, this is good. So, very first question: what kind of snowflake therapist are our veterans sent to? In the previous video, so I told one of the events that gave me PTSD uh, to a therapist in full detail, and I went to go see the therapist again as like a follow up. And that therapist, I had a new therapist, and so I asked my new therapist, like, hey, what happened to Doctor So and So? And they're like, oh, I'm not trying to be rude, but I don't believe they want to see you anymore because your story like they didn't use traumatized. And they said something along the lines of secondary PTSD or secondhand PTSD, which I had no idea that was a thing. Like just telling a story can give somebody PTSD. So since then, I haven't told anyone in great detail what occurred during that event. So I mean, I don't want to say I blame them, but I don't blame them. Like I'm pretty sure she had kids. And so when I told her the story, she probably imagined her kid in that situation as well. And that probably made her very uncomfortable. I know, therapists, they're supposed to hear everything. They're probably supposed to hear like the worst of the worst and are able to console the individual. In this case, I probably hit a nerve, or maybe she had some previous trauma that was somewhat related to that. So I don't blame her. The past two therapists that I've had since her have been wonderful. So
Hmm.
no issue with them. And it put things into perspective too, because after I told her the story and I told it to her, I'll be honest, I don't even remember getting emotional when I told the story. I just like told it as it was, and being told that the therapist doesn't want to see after the story made me realize like how I'm trying to think of a better word, but how screwed up the story was.
Mm.
So yeah, I don't nothing against her. I hope she's getting the treatment that she needs for any sort of trauma that she's experienced. But moving on to the second question, I've heard from several people about how they are very hesitant to go to a group because of PTSD. So in my case, mine is not, well, it's combat related, but I'm not there. Like I wasn't there. This was all through a screen. I wasn't actively being shot at. I wasn't shooting at anyone with a gun. And they said people are very hesitant to go to a group because of their PTSD. Would it be helpful if there was a separate group for non-combat related vets? And the first time I read that question, I thought about that for a long time. I'm sure it'd be helpful for some, but I don't know if it'd be helpful for me. I still believe that. Like my PTSD isn't. I don't know how to explain it. Like I know other people's experiences were worse than mine, and I'm not saying that because they had it worse, that my you know thing is still PTSD. I just don't want to like draw too much attention to it. I don't want to be in a group setting where people can see me, know my actual name, and they're like, "Oh, look at that guy. He stared at a screen and that happened. Yeah, I got my legs blown off." But having a separate group to you know the differentiate between the two, I don't know if that's something that I would be into. Maybe there's other veterans out there that would like to have that option. But as far as like face to face therapy with other veterans talking about each other's experiences, I just it didn't sit well with me. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing it. Not that it wouldn't sit well. I don't feel comfortable with it. So, going to bring up my next point. VRChat because we have the ability to talk to each other without knowing our real names or seeing our real faces. It makes it easier to talk about this.
Mm.
And somebody even mentioned that VR therapy should be a thing. And after the first interview that I had with Azil, I mean, it lasted 4 hours. I was talking out the ass, just everything. First thing that popped in my head. All right, let's talk about this, and it just kept going. I haven't done that with anybody before, so it was nice to be able just to get everything out and just throw it all on the table and be like, this is what I experienced, and to have somebody listen. And I think like not only did like talking to somebody else in VR help about it. Now I know there's some conflicting comments on this, but this world is fucking awesome. Like
Mhm.
I could just be sitting there telling a story, and next thing you know, this fractal circle sphere thing is flying into my face, and it's like, oh, wow, oh, that's kind of cool. And then like the entire background, I don't know, like the whole scene just makes it feel a lot more comforting. There's movement like in the corners of my eye, and I mean, I find that pretty therapeutic. So I don't see why anybody else wouldn't.
It's like a fidget for me. Like it keeps my brain engaged enough that I can have everything else dedicated to what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Full disclosure. So I did read every comment on the previous video. Few things to clarify. I'm not a JTAC. I'm a geospatial intelligence targeteer. I'm within the intelligence career field. I was put out onto the operations floor to conduct dynamic targeting. I wasn't passing 9 lines. So I know a lot of you military folks probably know what a 9 line is, but we were dropping something called targeting messages. I can't really get into in depth of what it consisted of, but baseline it was, here's the target, here's the weapon we want you to use, here's the restrictions, and here is the commander's intent. Like with what you want to do. Do you want it destroyed? Do you want it degraded? So not a JTAC, but I mean those guys are crazy. JTACs, like they have to be incredibly like physically fit. They have to be able to call in air support during times of like, heavy firefights. Hey, I can't do that shit. I'm an intel dude. If I get shot at, you know what I'm doing? I'm hiding behind my desk. And if you see
Those
an intel dude like running out in the battlefield shooting shit, that's World War III. If you see me out there, that's World War III.
Yeah, it sounds like JTACs are literally like kill streak users.
Oh my God. That's the best description I've ever heard, but it's so true. Whenever I talk to a JTAC, it's like, oh yeah, what was like your favorite aircraft to work with? And they would all say AC-130s. AC-130s was the best. Oh, and that's another thing too. I was talking about airframes on the previous video, and I mentioned A-10s and how I thought they were cool and they were able to hit our targets. Full disclosure, I do not believe that is the best aircraft in the Air Force inventory, but it was the most useful tool against ISIS because one, we already had air superiority, and two, if we were striking targets in densely populated areas, their gun was pretty accurate. Somebody left a comment stating like what the manufacturer stated the overall error of the weapon was on impact. That has since been refined quite a bit.
Mhm.
They did a hell of a job. Let's see. Question number 3. So, did you manage all of the strikes for your operations center, or were you like the guy who would work alongside a JTAC? So I didn't manage all the strikes for our operations center, but I did manage all of the dynamic strikes for our unit. So let me explain. So we had sections of both Syria and Iraq completely like sectioned off to where like, okay, this entity took southern Iraq. This entity took Eastern Syria. Like, I mean, those aren't exact locations, but we broke them out by grids or by military grids. It was a grid pattern, and they just kind of gave us our own boxes. So I was in charge of dynamic strikes in parts of Western Iraq and almost all of Syria where we were operating, with the exception of like northernmost Syria.
Mhm.
So we were in charge of a few birds. So as birds were coming off station or they were coming off their original tasking, it would be handed over to us. And it's like, okay, we have X amount of missiles on board. We have this amount of playtime, which is essentially this is how much or how far we can fly. What can you use us for? And so we would use them for either finding targets to strike or doing ISR or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Basically, just looking at a target, see what it does, if it's notable, we continue to prosecute it as if it's a target. And if it's not, then we move on. Or we would just give it to another unit, be like, we have no need for this. We already have 2 or 3 birds in our stack. We would just hand it off. So, no, not JTACs, but we never actually worked alongside JTACs now that I think about it. We
Hmm.
never had a JTAC next to us. We had a couple of Brits and Aussies and Canadians. The DT chief was to my left, and our JAG, or our Judge Advocate General, which is basically a military lawyer, we had down on the far end of our section for our overall dynamic targeting cell.
The JAG is like your rapid fire ethics specialist, right? Like you give them
Yes,
a very short amount of time while a target's ready, and they say you can do this, or that's not ethical. We can't take that shot.
exactly. And not only did the like he or she answer questions whether or not like, okay, is this target strikeable, but they would also answer questions such as, can we continue to prosecute this target? Maybe not as a strike, but as like some sort of target development based off of the information that we currently have. Now, they didn't typically make that decision, but in some cases, to where we had to push our birds into areas that we knew had some threats. Like ISIS they had AAA, they had shoulder fired man portable air defense systems or man pads. We would occasionally have to get approval from our JAG to go do that.
Hmm.
So all of our JAGs are cool. I was going to say the name of one because it was a funny name, but then I realized I probably shouldn't do that.
Good job catching yourself.
Yep. In fact, he is retired. So, all right. Fourth question. This one's funny. Is chat VR all furries? Is our military full of furries? What the fuck? We are we are Intel. You be the judge.
Oh my god.
Intel is full of. Okay, so if you're not a furry, you're a weeb. And if you're not a weeb, no one ever talks to you. You're just kind of shoved out to the side. Like if you're normal, or if I don't know, you have normal interests, you're just kind of pushed aside, like,
Imagine being normal in any field that involves Intel or computer science.
our computer, like the computer guys, the system folks, holy shit. That's like, you might as well just make an entire furry convention in their office, because that's essentially what it is.
Have you seen the meme that's like frequently brought together and it's the C programming language and then a pair of striped thigh highs?
I think I have seen that. It's way too accurate though. But so Intel is full of nerds. I mean, we don't care. We're all nerds. It's just who we are.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. If you're comfortable talking about it, what, if anything, was done to discipline personnel who either knowingly caused collateral damage or who were grossly negligent? First of all, fantastic question, because you always see these stories of like, oh, we accidentally struck a school in Afghanistan. I think it was a school or a hospital that we struck in Afghanistan. It was with I think a C-130, AC-130, that caused a bunch of civilian casualties. And a lot of the uproar was no one's going to be held accountable. Well, there were quite a few people that were held accountable as well. So I can't speak specifically on that one and whether or not anyone was jailed, but during Operation Inherent Resolve, when there was a civilian casualty incident or CivCas incident or an alleged CivCas incident, it would be routed up. They had figured out where this munition came from, who gave the authorization for this munition, and did it actually cause casualties. Now, that last part is a little bit tricky because frequently you would have folks claim airstrikes in the middle of the desert. In this case, like Anbar province in Iraq, which is just almost nothing but desert, very sparsely populated. And they're like, yeah, we were struck right here. They would give us coordinates that plot out in the middle of nowhere, and we'd have no information on a strike that ever occurred there. Even dating back to 91, like we document all of our strikes. So we're able to pull up historical data. So out in the middle of the desert, he's claiming that he lost his entire family in an airstrike. Oh, by the way, he doesn't have any sort of record to indicate that his family ever existed. And he goes to a U.S. military liaison asking for money.
Mm.
Huh. Well, you kind of tie two and two together. A lot of the folks out there, unfortunately, are poor, or they're lower class. They don't have a lot of money to even have like electricity or water. Now, maybe if you're like in Baghdad or Mosul or Bil, maybe you'd fare a little bit better there. But out in like middle of nowhere, they were poor. So not only would ISIS steal all of their shit, but then it's like their only form of money would be to ask for it. So we would occasionally get these reports stating that there was a CivCas incident and we couldn't verify it, so we couldn't give them money. And there were incidents to where we could verify it. And if we were able to verify it and it turned out to be due to a person's negligence with either guiding the weapon or authorizing an airstrike in a populated area or anything along those lines, yes, they got disciplined. There was a couple of folks that actually been to jail because of strikes that didn't go well.
Are there specific prisons for military criminals?
There is, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. There's one prison that comes to mind, but I can't remember the name of it to save my life. But yeah, they're usually like reduced to rank E1, which is like the lowest rank in the military. They have like their BAH and BAS or base. It's like their housing allowance and their food allowance taken away, and then they're in this jail for X amount of years, and then they're dishonorably discharged. So it's happened before. There is accountability, not at the leadership level, not at the higher leadership level, like the anything '07 and above or 1 star and above. Yeah, you're not going to see anything like that.
Corruption in the
Um,
military, definitely something new to me. Never heard of that before.
so and sometimes like yeah, that particular leader authorized the strike. They won't be like they'll authorize the strike, but it may end up being somebody else within the chain of command that made the negligent call to use a particular weapon, or they did something that caused civilian casualties that wasn't the weapon's fault. Like, oh, we threw a hellfire in the middle of a crowd. Well, that dude's fucked.
Yeah.
So yeah, there. In short, yes, and there was jail time. There was some jail time for people. There was discipline.
Okay, that's good. I have a couple of questions from chat that I'm going to interject with because I'm going to forget them
Sweet.
if I do not. Have you ever encountered any history enthusiasts or archaeologists that decided to join the Army or Air Force due to rage from ISIS destroying, like a care about history?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. I don't think I know anybody off the top of my head. I know of like they were already in when that was going on, and they would give us like the entire background on like so the instance or the location that I used in the previous video was Palmyra. I could be butchering the name. I mean that's the only way I've ever said it, or Tadmor, which I believe is like the more recent name, or like that's the modern name. But there were dudes that like knew the entire history of that location, and I'm just like, how do you know this? Oh, I in college. Oh, got it. Cool. But I don't believe we've had anybody join, history enthusiasts join, because of ISIS. At least none that I've seen. I'm sure there has been, but
Yeah.
just not in our career field.
I'm certain that there are people that are like, these motherfuckers are destroying history. I gotta save it. And you kind of have like, I don't even know if you call it a hero complex, because that kind of has a negative connotation. If you're actually going out there and being a hero, then it's not exactly a complex. It's a reality, huh?
I mean, there was some folks in the targeting field that were in it for glory. Like, hey, I got this many kills. So I mean, there is a hero complex to some people, and
Yeah.
it's just, I mean, it's dumb. Like, why do you care about that shit?
Yeah. Either you're doing good or you're not. Don't count the bodies, dude.
Right. Oh, yeah. At least it's not like Vietnam, to where it's like, okay, how many did we kill today? We got to put that in the newspaper. It wasn't like that.
Can I ask you to give me as someone who has seen death, what do you feel about the Vietnam War that maybe the average person hasn't heard? Just real quick.
Oh, what do I think about the Vietnam War? Planned very poorly. There were some. So I mainly focus on like when it comes to history. I focus on the air component. That's the part that I believe is fascinating with aircraft, whether it be from World War II on up. There were parts of the air campaign that didn't make any sense, and a lot of the folks, I don't want to say that planned the air campaign in Vietnam, but took part in it, or at least were, young airmen or young, soldiers, young Marines, whatever, are now senior analysts working for some of the agencies that exist today. So let me throw in an example. Let's say you want to stop an airfield from operating. You don't want any aircraft to take off. Well, back during the Vietnam War, one of the things they did was they bombed the runway. They bombed the taxiway so no one could taxi around and actually take off and use it. Well, during the Vietnam era, one of the tactics was to not only continuously bombard these airfields, but they would send the same bombers with the same crew down the same path every single time around the same part of the day. They just keep sending them day after day, just bombing the same airfield. And there's a thing called a surface to air missile. So the Vietnamese, they use something called the SA-2. It's an older Soviet surface to air missile system. The thing looks like a damn telephone pole. It's massive. So what the Vietnamese would do is they would figure out, which corridor these bombers were going down, and they would just blast them out of the sky. And that's one thing that just didn't make sense to me, because they went down the same path. There was laziness. Yeah, the initial plan was good, but then you have to like tweak the plan so the enemy can't anticipate your next move. And that's one thing about the Vietnam War that kind of really brought light to targeting in its infancy to targeting now. So probably like as far like a political standpoint, I think it was just stupid. Like
Yeah.
that whole conflict was just dumb.
But yeah, it's really interesting to hear that, like, from someone who knows what you're a gamer, you know the term metagame, right? Like the meta. Like, it's interesting how the
And
meta has changed. Like the ways that just the human thought aspect of war has changed. Not just our technology, not just our strategies, but like how we think about it.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and it's still growing to this day. Like, even though I'm out of the targeting career field, I'm still in a field to where I can see what happens with that career field. And there's already been a lot of changes with the targeting career field. A lot of it for the good too. I don't think there's a negative. I mean, other than the training, because since there's no active conflict, it's kind of hard to train some of the new airmen that come in on like, okay, this is how it's done. Because you could be trained one way, like I was during tech school, but then it's like, okay, here's OIR, here's a thing called ISIS, make them go away.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to like, I don't want to say fend for yourself, but you have to like develop your own plan.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, you talk about how training is very different based on scenario. We're pretty high on the doomsday clock right now, I'd say, right? Like people are thinking about a World War III scenario right now in
Yeah.
specifically like with Russia, right? And I'm wondering like in the event of a non-nuclear war, do we have people in our military that are trained for combat in that area?
Yes. I can't go into depth, but yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so the whole doom and gloom of like World War III, I don't know why it's kicking up now. I mean, other than Ukraine, them potentially using nukes again. I mean, I don't know, the fact that we have social media, we have multiple biased and unbiased news agencies all reporting on the same thing, saying, "Oh, well, Putin has nukes; he could use that any time." It's like, well, we could use nukes at any time too. I don't want to say it's fear mongering, but there's a lot of people out there that fearmonger for no reason. They
Yeah.
have they have nukes, but you know how stupid that would be for them to use nukes?
Yeah.
As soon as the first one is launched, I mean, there's contingencies in place. Maybe not for Ukraine in general, but like there are contingencies to where if anybody used a nuclear weapon, they would probably have a very bad day afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, I think about it a lot. The idea of if I was the guy who had to take it from an end of my country to an end of the world scenario, I would
Yeah.
never be able to do it. No way. I
Yeah.
could not push the button if every single person in my higher ranking order was telling me to.
That so and I think about that too because so I think it's called like they're a missileer. Like they're officers that sit in bunkers basically waiting for the call to push the button to launch nukes. That has got to be a crazy job. I mean, I know a lot of it is like sitting there reading tech manuals on how to do your job, but in the grand scheme of things, like if you get a phone call and I'm sure they have exercises to where they don't say exercise and there's like, all right, just do it and see if the person actually does it. That's a mind fuck to
Yeah.
even think about. That yeah, I couldn't do that job.
Imagine having a fire drill where you think you're ending the world.
Oh yeah. Yeah, alarms going off. All right, time to input the codes, turn the keys, press the button, and then it's like
Ugh,
end simulation.
that
Yeah, that would be rough. If you want, I got a couple more questions on here that I can read, unless there's some in chat. Unless there's a couple of questions in chat that you want me to answer.
Yeah, I have one from Maceman, who is someone who is in a video. He said, "Has anyone you know ever refused to press the button after they were asked to?"
To press the button, like from a UAV operator launching a missile.
Yeah, someone who was going to do a strike. Did they ever have like
Trying to
moral qualms
think.
that said, "No, I can't do this"?
I'll be honest, I can't think of a time to where that's happened because so the whole engagement sequence is interesting because one person in the ground control station launches the missile and the other one guides it. So there's always two people in the mix and they both have to be in agreement that this strike will be okay. We have or we're briefed the intelligence on what we believe the target is. This is what we want to do to it. And then if they both agree, they'll both agree. And if one of them disagrees, then they can talk to the originator of the strike. So it's not necessarily the pilot or the sensor that makes that decision to strike unless it's like an immediate threat to forces on the ground or if they have free fire authority, which I don't believe I've ever seen.
Are there scenarios where it could happen?
To where if it's like a free fire scenario. Yeah, so if and I shouldn't even say free fire because sometimes they'll get pre-authorization to strike something before they even see it. So in case if there's like a troops in contact or a tick, I'm just going to say tick for short, they can redirect an asset toward that tick. And if they see friendly forces, like, oh, we have friendly forces that are dead and wounded, massive attack, RPGs, small arms, you name it, they can just go ahead and start launching missiles at after they, conclude where the friendlies are and where the enemy is, then they can start launching missiles. But half the time or I should say the majority of the time, about 90% of it, we either drop them 9 lines or targeting messages.
Mm.
So there is some sort of like man in the loop as we pass it to them.
Yeah.
But as far as not pressing the button, okay, maybe not pressing the button in a drone. So when I was talking about my deployment, I was talking about dynamic targeting. Well, there's another thing called deliberate targeting to where we can pre-plan where bombs go. So we actually drop a thing called a point, which is a 3D point in space that says like, okay, this is where the bomb needs to go. It's a set of coordinates. It also has like elevation data involved with it, and you can pre-plan those. Well, one of the things that we were told to pre-plan, let's just say it was a sensitive target, and if we struck it, it probably would have caused civilian casualties, and we all knew this, and we all collectively just said no. And it was like a 2-star that was requesting it. Of course, the 2-star was brand new. He didn't really know like what's considered valid and not valid. So after that, I believe he was removed from his position. Thank God.
Mm.
But he was asking if we could strike this particular entity. I wish I can get into detail because it was kind of a bad target to go after. It's like, I don't know why we're hitting this. I don't know if ISIS is even using this. But we ended up collectively just saying no, strike was canceled, and we move about our merry day.
Do you think it was negligence or malice?
I don't believe it was malice or negligence. So after we said no, we then asked, okay, so what is the intelligence that's driving this target to be struck? And we all looked at the intelligence and I mean, it looked good. Like there wasn't any holes. Like depending on the source of the intelligence, like if it's like one person tell, like, hey, Azil, you see that little fractal over there? There's a dude hiding in there. He's getting ready to shoot you.
Yeah, I'd
That's
probably.
that's a form of intelligence.
Yeah.
That's human intelligence. You
Yeah.
can also, I don't know, listen into their radio communications, and if they're talking between each other saying, "Hey, we're going to do an attack between this time," well, that's probably a little bit more realistic than some dude pointing over in a general direction and saying, "There, bad guy there."
Yeah. And I'm guessing in school you must have learned about like the validity, importance, and interactions between forms of intelligence.
Yes, yes. And that's one thing that we take into account too when we were pre-planning these targets is the validity of the intelligence. So if you have like multiple people pointing in a direction and saying, "Hey, there's bad guys over here," yeah, that sounds more feasible than one guy saying it. But if you have that combined with, I don't know, full motion video from a UAV or a manned platform that shows that there are dudes with AKs in this area and it looks to be nefarious, then all of the intelligence coming together builds a picture that makes it strikeable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I have another donation here from Jack Manson who says, "Dad and Bro were in the military as an engineer and a mechanic respectively. They both have
Oh,
PTSD, and
hell
the
yeah.
combat vets didn't see any less of them. I don't think they would think any less about you."
Damn. And that man, that and comments like that are just like they're great to read and hear. And I'm glad there's a bunch of people supporting me in the comments of the previous video as well. That was really heartwarming to know.
Yeah.
That it's valid. And like I said, I'm still trying to come to terms with it too, like that it's valid. It's just as valid as somebody else's PTSD. Because I hear that, but I'm still trying to, I don't know, like 100% believe it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still trying to reach that point. So I do eventually want to talk to other veterans, maybe not in like a real life sense, but even like a VR sense. In my current work environment, so I work in an environment with a lot of other veterans, and veterans can be like, I don't want to say vet bros because you have veterans that are friends that can, I guess, you feed off each other's energy. I'm trying to think of a better word for that.
Like they connect well.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. So you can connect well. And then you have vet bros. Vet bros are like, yeah, man. So in Afghanistan, I, walking out there with my 511 gear and I fucking, I don't know, shot a dude. Like those are vet bros.
Oh
They are so
God.
annoying.
Yeah.
So we're working with a couple vet bros too, but they're all right. They're all good people. So it'd be interesting to get veterans in VR chat in a non-military setting and
Yeah.
just hash things out.
Yeah, it would be really cool to see that. I've been thinking of it for a while, but I was like, how can I make this work in a way that it feels fluid and everything kind of just, clicks together? And I feel like now that I've had so much interaction with different people in the military and I know each of the people individually pretty well, I think I can make it work. So I'd be happy to set something up like that.
That'd be cool. And if everyone else is down with it too, like I don't want to be the only one to be like, yeah, let's do this, and everyone's like, I don't feel comfortable with it. So I respect people's boundaries. If they don't feel comfortable with it, hey, that's cool.
Yeah.
We can always chill some other time. See, I do have another question on here, and I think this kind of ties into what we're just talking about. The popular image of that region is one of everyone having an AK. How did you tell the difference between civilians and ISIS or other hostile targets? One, that's another really, really good question too, because civilians also have guns out there. Now, during the ISIS surge into Iraq, um, they ended up not only like raping and pillaging, but stealing everybody's belongings, including weapons. If there was a weapon, they stole it. So if you saw somebody walking around in ISIS controlled territory with a weapon around other people with weapons, they were probably hostile. Now, in one case, we did see a guy, I believe it was with an AK 47, with a bunch of other people who were unarmed, and they had a tent out in the middle of the desert in Syria. And the only reason why I believe he wasn't ISIS was because he's out in the middle of nowhere with a fire going, and you could tell he's trying to conceal the fire. Now, they could be trying to conceal the fire from us, but they could also be trying to conceal the fire from other ground units that may be in that area. So, for all we know, that could be a family trying to hide. So there are precautions that we take. Now, if there's intelligence saying that, I don't know, this dude that we've been following is going to go out somewhere in the middle of the desert and try to, I don't know, hunt for food. Okay, well now we have intelligence to indicate that that guy is ISIS. So there's a higher likelihood that we would end up striking him.
Mm-hmm.
So there were different thoughts that we had in place to make our operation successful.
And how standardized were those? Because once you've had like that idea and you've had this, because I'm sure that for every time you've had a scenario, you have something at least a little similar you can refer back to, right? How
Yep.
much of that was written down? Because obviously you have it in your head, but when everybody's working on the same page, you got to have it written down somewhere.
As it was happening, as these strikes were happening, or even if we were just doing like surveillance on a particular target, if we saw some sort of either ISIS TTP or techniques and procedures, or a civilian TTP, we would end up writing it down or at least document it in our own form. So if we do end up going to that area and seeing the same thing, we're familiar with who and why they're operating like that. Now, as far as after I got out, I have no idea if they have it written down anywhere as part of their continuity of operations.
Mm-hmm.
Not a clue. I mean, I'm out of the targeting realm now, so I wish I could say like, yes, we have learned, we have lessons learned, but I don't know. I don't know if we do. I mean, we wrote a whole bunch of like, okay, in dynamic targeting, how do you do this? So like, even after I came back from my deployment, we had somebody from our tech school in Texas swing on by and basically asked us questions like, okay, so when you went through in tech school doing dynamic targeting as part of the exercise, how well does it compare to real life? And I was like, it didn't. There was nothing comparable. That that course that in tech school was so shit and unrealistic because you end up asking like a million different people for permission to engage, and that just wasn't the case. Like you're asking Navy dudes if you can engage. So in the exercise, you're asking Navy guys if you can engage a target for something out in the middle of the fucking desert. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So obviously, as the targeting TTPs change, then their coursework hopefully gets reflected to where some of the newer airmen learn it.
Yeah. Javier says, I have a question. Ukraine recently attacked some Russian ships with water drones loaded with explosives. The debate is about whether or not there is a change of overall military tactics. What's coming?
That is a phenomenal question. Not because I don't know it, but because like the general public is able to see this shift in tactics. I think the Ukraine war is going to be the most documented war in history so far. Yes, to answer your question, there is a massive change in tactics. I don't know what it is because I'm not working that mission set, but I've noticed like some of the tactics that I've seen when ISIS was a big thing in Iraq and Syria. They would use quadcopters to drop like these little munitions, whether they be grenades or they would be parts of like old cluster munitions to hit like these smaller targets like vehicles or groups of personnel. Like you're seeing that in Ukraine too, which is pretty insane. You're also seeing one-way attack UAVs or suicide UAVs that Russia recently acquired from God knows where, probably Iran or something, to where they'll fly in. They have pre-programmed waypoints. They'll fly just like any other regular drone, and you'll see videos of this on Twitter of them buzzing by. They sound like flying lawnmowers, and they're flying maybe 500 feet off the ground, and they will find their, or I don't want to say find their target, but then they're pre-programmed to like cut off or to like dive onto a target and hit. And then now you have these waterborne drones. That one, that's fucking cool. I've
Mm-hmm.
never heard of that. And two, I'm curious to see how effective they are because you have all these tactics that are developing during this conflict. I'm curious to see how a full-blown war, simulated war between two major powers would be, especially like with Russia being one of the powers.
Yeah.
So yes, massive shift in tactics.
Imagine being on a boat and knowing there's a torpedo with a brain after you. Fuck that.
Oh, I got a good one. So in World War II, or at least near the end of World War II, they were developing the first guided bomb. And so this was a change in tactics because they ended up using a pigeon. They would take this pigeon and shove them into a bomb, and in front of the pigeon it was like tic-tac-toe. So you had a 3x3 quadrant, and they would train the pigeon to peck at the quadrant with a boat in it, or a ship, I should say a ship, a military ship specifically. And they would pick at it. And what it would do is, as they picked at it, it would move like some sort of, I don't know, pulley system or a hydraulic system to put that ship back into the middle. Then the ship would like slowly move over into another quadrant. Pigeon would pick at that and it'd go right back to the center again. And so they programmed the pigeon to operate as the guidance system for these bombs against military ships during World War II. I don't think they actually used it operationally, but there's an entire documentary on YouTube about it. I forgot what it's called. Fucking phenomenal. But that's a change in tactics to where they're using some sort of guidance system rather than dropping sticks of munitions on one target, or like I think they used I think it was called like a tall boy or something like that they used on the Bismarck, some big German ship. Instead, they just strap a guidance kit to a smaller bomb and they could just like release that. So changing tactics. That's a change in World War II tactics, which is really, really cool.
Artificial intelligence? Nah, we're using natural intelligence.
And if y'all want a good documentary on sort of like what targeteers do today, except back in World War II, look up the documentary 3D Spies of World War II. It's phenomenal. They take like these, I think they were Spitfires, they put cameras on each side of the wings and they would take pictures over German held territory. And that's actually how they found, I believe it was the first V2 rocket. So they would take these two photos and overlay them with each other with these special glasses to turn it into a 3D picture. And that's what we did as targeteers. We used 3D imagery to tell the bomb where to go. We would put that bomb in a point in space. Well, back in World War II, that's what they used to find hideouts. Because in 3D, in a 3D space, you can easily see buildings, you could see troop concentrations, you could see tall weapons such as ballistic missiles. So really cool. I know I kind of got off topic on that, but that is probably one of my favorite documentaries that sort of highlight what we do, except in a modern sense.
Yeah, have you met any of the like engineers that make the shit that you used?
Oh yeah, yep. A couple of the engineers actually ended up. Well, I shouldn't say the engineers, but like the coders and whatnot for the systems that we use. Some of them actually stopped coding for it because they ended up training a whole bunch of other people, and then they go and teach it, which is really cool because not only for the Air Force we have targeteers, but like the Army has their own specialty that deals with point dropping. I believe the Navy also has it. Basically, every branch has their own version of a point dropper or a targeteer, and they go through this school. And those guys are now teaching the school, and they are the most chill dudes ever. One of them, I shit you not, he was in his mid 70s and he listened to heavy metal. Now, not like death metal, but like this guy was like old. He looked a little frail. He had a really calm, sweet voice. And it's like, oh, well, what do you like to do? He's like, oh, I like to listen to music. He's like, you want to see my setup? And we're like, yeah, sure. And he has all these speakers lined up on the inside of his house and he listened to death metal. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us, but like those were the coders that worked with the program. And of course, they go through different iterations or different names of the program, constantly being improved. So yeah, it's pretty cool. We actually got to show New York. So we had New York Times and CBS. David Martin from 60 Minutes actually came down to our unit, and we got to show them like what targeting was and what it consisted of. And we got to let them use those machines, not like use like, actually drop points on them, but we got to let them look at the 3D imagery, and they thought that was like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
So it's like one of those like we'll show it to friends and family and whatnot on an unclassified scale, but we use it for operations.
I mean, yeah, I would think it'd be pretty cool too if I saw Google Maps, but the directions button was replaced with explode.
Oh my god.
That sounds fucking awesome. Just add stop, as in stop existing, of course.
So that sort of occurred whenever you're doing point dropping for like target, like for exercises. So when you're dropping live munitions but not on real targets, it just become like, I like that part of the dirt. I like that part of the road. You just kind of pick and choose where you want the bombs to go, so the flyers can actually go and practice dropping live munitions. But in an operational standpoint, it's not so much like like, oh, I like that building, I like that. There is a science behind how we target things. It's not okay, this point goes in the middle of the building. It may not always go in the middle of the building. Sometimes we'll know the layout of the building, and we're able to determine which room we want the bomb to affect first, or if we want it to affect less of like a nearby collateral concern, we can change that. So you can drop a point in 3D space. It could be above ground, it could be below ground. That bomb's going to go there.
Yeah.
And that's the neat thing with JDAMs.
And so the JDAMs, the way that they use higher up points is because they can do air detonations, right?
Yes, yeah. So there's some fusing options on JDAMs to where it can detonate. Usually it's like a fixed point above the intended target. And the reasoning why you'd want to have an above ground detonation versus an instantaneous detonation on the ground is to maximize the amount of fragmentation and blast that is dispersed over a small area. So whereas if you were to have an instantaneous detonation, now you hear instantaneous as if the bomb is hitting the ground and immediately blowing up. It's instantaneous, but it's not true instantaneous, because that fuse still has to have enough time for the electrical signal to reach the fuse, for it to ignite the fuse itself, or like the fuse to ignite the explosive fill itself. So there's a little bit of a time delay. So the bomb is partially burying itself, even though it's considered instantaneous. So the good thing about airburst fuses is that now you pretty much negate that. It's air bursting above the target. So that'd be good for softer targets like vehicles, personnel, radars, you name it. There are two questions, but they're kind of combined into one, that I can go ahead and read off. So you mentioned having a boyfriend during the interview. What was your experience being LGBTQ plus in the Air Force? And what's it like as oh wait, okay, no, disregard. That is the same question from two different people. So funny enough, I did mention my significant other in the other video, where he is a sensor operator that we struck targets together. Like that's how we met, and we just kind of hit it off in chat. And I don't know, it was pretty interesting. But I'll be 100% honest, I don't remember saying he or him or anything like that in the video. I just kind of wanted to keep it neutral. But I mean, now that it's out of the bag, yeah. I mean, we kind of, I mean, I didn't really experience anything in the Air Force being engaged to another dude, because I'd never talked about it. It's not, I don't want to say it's like, it's really no one's business. I mean, if they ask, like, hey, are you married? Are you engaged? Whatnot? Yeah, I'll tell them. But otherwise, I'm not just going around and be like, hey, guys, I'm gay. Hey. Because, I mean, if you do that in the military, everyone's just kind of like, okay, bro,
Yeah.
cool. And not just that, but I work with a bunch of old people, and old military retirees are not too receptive to that sometimes. So
Yeah.
I don't want to burn any bridges just yet.
Yeah.
So, but a bunch of my friends know. Recently told my family, they were like, yeah, we know. It's like, oh, cool. All right, well, that was easy. Yeah, a bunch of my close friends know. A few folks at work know. So I mean, it is what it is. We're both normal people just doing, I don't want to say normal things, but I mean,
Yeah.
I guess as relatively normal as it can be. Let's see, I got another. Will you be part of the rescue effort to free your Ukrainian cousin from Russian captivity? I have no part in strike operations anymore. I am out of that. And I don't even know who would do strike operations against the Russians other than the Ukrainians. Like,
Hmm.
I'm out of that loop. I deal with the Middle East,
Right.
but not in a targeting capacity. So, no, I will not be personally.
The other thing that I wanted to bring up while we're talking about Ukraine is kind of an unfortunate but common statement that I was getting from people was like, you realize America did the same thing in the Middle East. And I don't even want to give my own input on that. I want you to tell people why that's wrong.
So, U.S. operations in the Middle East has always been a finicky subject. I would say that this was more so like pre 1991, to where some of the discourse between the U.S. and the Middle Eastern operations started before we ended up kicking Saddam out of Kuwait. Actually, we can go even further. We can the Iranian Revolution, where we ended up harboring, what was the guy's name? But we ended up bringing it back here to the States for like some medical treatment, pissed a lot of people off. So our report card with the Middle East isn't too hot right now. But I will say the rationale and why we went back to go combat ISIS was fair, because I'm also seeing a lot of comments stating that, one, we have no business going after ISIS, or we have no business operating in both Iraq and Syria to defeat ISIS, because, well, of our Middle Eastern track record. Why are we going back in to defeat them? Well, before all that occurred, granted, ISIS was renamed a couple of times, but before then, they were part of Al Qaeda. We ended up slowly withdrawing out of Iraq, and that's when parts of Al Qaeda kind of broke off, formed ISI, not to be confused with the Israelis, but ISI, Islamic State in Iraq. And then they shifted over to Syria, took a whole bunch of stuff over there. And they're like, all right, well, we can use all this stuff to move right back into Iraq and just sweep it clean. And that's why we had to go back in there, because some of the atrocities that we saw from ISIS when they were initially taking over was horrendous. And I'm not just talking about executions. Now, this is where the topic gets this can get a little graphic. So if you're uncomfortable, feel free to leave the stream. Beheadings, that was a big thing. Straight up just executions, shooting someone in the back of the head. When they were rummaging through Iraq, starting in Anbar Desert, working all the way almost to the outskirts of Baghdad, they were doing drive-by shootings. They were executing kids, women and kids. They were looting a whole bunch of military equipment that we essentially gave the Iraqis when we were training them to defend it. Now, granted, the Iraqis tried to defend as much as they could, but ISIS was rolling through, and they were full-fledged. And we're just, I don't want to say we're standing there on the sideline like watching it, because we were kind of still withdrawing at the same time, but it's like, okay, maybe we should keep some equipment here and do this. They had all this equipment and no one was really doing anything. No one from the international community was really doing anything. And I don't want America to be like the world police or anything, but who else is going to deal with this? Are we just going to let ISIS just take Baghdad and just keep rolling on through, take, other Middle Eastern countries? Maybe they'll roll into Jordan next. Maybe they'll roll into Saudi Arabia, maybe Kuwait, maybe Iran. Who knows? Like they're making all these crazy territorial gains and no one's doing anything about it. And that was pretty much the premise on why we should probably go in and at least start dealing with this. At least try to keep them in their tracks. Now, we're going back to the influence operations during the Second Gulf War was, they have WMDs, we're going to go in and get rid of these WMDs and free the Iraqi people. Now, whenever you hear WMDs, a lot of folks tend to think nukes. It just makes sense. WMDs also consist of biological and chemical weapons. And Saddam did have chemical weapons that we're using against the Kurds specifically. So our rationale for going in wasn't pushed to the American public as much, or it wasn't like we're going in because they're using chemical weapons. It was, we're going in because they have WMDs, and then leaving the American public to come up with their own thoughts and what they believed was a WMD, which in this case was a nuke. Now, they did have nuclear reactors at one point, but I think the Israelis struck it or it's dismantled or something. So our IO is terrible. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, their IO, or their rationale, was being spread everywhere on the internet, to include primarily English-speaking sites. So as far as comparing the two with Middle Eastern affairs, with what's going on in Ukraine, it's hard to compare the two, because there's a lot of fuck ups in the Middle East, and then now you have this IO campaign that seems to be working with Ukraine and Russia right now. That's just my opinion. And of course, it's not like, all the Russians are doing it, or like at least the Russian government is the only one doing it. You also have like other countries that are chiming in like, oh, we're seeing, the Ukrainians are pushing through and capturing this city when they're nowhere close to it. or vice versa. The Russians are really close to pushing in the city, massive, Ukrainian casualties, and that's just not the case. There's so much misinformation being shared on the internet, it's hard to sort of decipher what's really going on. And that's part of the influence operations, is making the person confused into what's true and what's not.
Yeah. It's not even just about pushing a narrative, it's about pushing a reality.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question for you from Spigs, a couple of them. He said, ask him if he lost his 2020 vision squinting at the blurry satellite photos and came out of his deployment looking like Gollum.
Oh my god. So one, my eye vision, or my vision has decreased a little bit. I used to have 2010 vision when I was in the military, all the way up until I got out, because they do another vision test. I think it was 2010. Did another vision test before I got out. It was still 2010. Well, fast forward up until about a year ago, I tested it, and now it's 2015. So it started to degrade just a little bit, and it's probably for staring at a screen for just way too long. Both when I was in the military and in my off time, because I like to play video games too. So I'm a bit of a nerd. Trying to think what else. As far as, did he call us gremlins? Is that what he said?
He said if
Or
you came out
Gollum?
looking like Gollum because like your back was arched from staring at the screen.
Bro, we looked like a bunch of shrimp walking out of the ops floor. We're all hunched over and shit. It was so bad.
He also asked if you used your security clearance on the SIPR to check for information on Sasquatch assassinating JFK.
That's a thing. I'm going to read it tomorrow. So there was one report on the higher system, and the FBI, whoever the fuck is watching this, no, I'm not about to spill classified information, but somebody created a joke, like completely misclassified, like it was like top secret, every caveat you could think of, and it was like this fake operation to go kill zombies or something like that. And someone had so much time on their hands, because it had to have taken the dude hours just to make. But you'll find some of the. I mean, there's also classified memes. You'll have classified memes actually like labeled secret and top secret that are funny.
That's amazing.
Bunch of nerds working Intel, so we end up making these classified memes.
And do the memes actually contain information that's necessary?
A lot of the times, no, but it'll contain like inside jokes. Like, let's say we were listening to the radio and it was somebody saying that, well, my teammate is a fuck ass. I hate him a lot. And like we'll make a meme template basically saying like when you're the fuck ass, and we'll have like, those, what do they call them? They're old memes, like rage comics, I think is what they were called. Like we'll use those. We'll use So we had one that we discussed in our previous video where we had Linda. And for those that haven't watched the video or don't know who I'm talking about, Linda was like this soccer mom that was, I believe, on Twitter. Might have been Facebook. She like had pictures of like her kids and whatnot. It was like the typical white soccer mom profile picture. And she ended up posting something, I think it was in like 2015 or 2014, saying like, I will destroy ISIS. And that was the meme of the century. Like we use that meme everywhere. We would Photoshop like Linda's face on top of like fighters who were like engaging in combat to make it look like Linda was actually out there. Or we had like this targeting pod footage of like, you'll see occasionally, like you'll see the bomb come in the targeting pod footage, and we ended up video editing that footage to include Linda's head like coming in, like it was her body like coming in to destroy this facility.
Oh
But
my
that's
god.
like some of the classified memes we did.
And you'd have to put it as classified because it was made like
Oh yeah, we had to put them in our classified systems.
that's hilarious. And you can just assign any level of classification you have clearance to.
So you're talking about deriving classified information. We had to derive it appropriately. So if it was like an unclassified meme on a classified system, you would just mark it as unclassified.
Mhm.
But if it actually contained classified information, like if it was like a video or like an imagery still of, I don't know, something military or non-military that we ended up turning into a meme, yes, you have to appropriately classify that medium to reflect the meme. So yes, there are classified memes out there, and some of them are phenomenal. Some of them are terrible.
That's
So I guess it
hilarious.
depends on the memer. Someone mentioned like Linda's the mascot against ISIS, and I didn't read anything else if there's if they posted more after it. But I mean that line was just so true with Linda. Let's see, I got a couple more questions on here. How many times did you lose soldiers due to pilots not getting there on time? So I guess it's kind of reverting back to one of my previous statements. So I'm not a JTAC, and I never operated or at least directed any sort of aircraft to go support a troops in contact. I was hands off with that. If there was a troops in contact, an actual JTAC took over and did that part. Not within our operations center, but within external operation centers. So I fortunately did not get to deal with that because I don't know if we wanted to deal with that. Seeing any sort of troops in contact is that could be nerve wracking because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how many people are going to die or if everybody will come out unscathed.
Yeah.
Um, we do have another question. Why were they wasting expensive munitions on ones and twos? My tax dollars at work. One, good question. Two, there was there was an effort in place initially to strike whatever target you could. Like, okay, we set fire to the hornet's nest and now they're all scattering. And so now we're starting to plink off all the folks that are scattering. Well, when that started calming down, more guidance was pushed to where we can only engage under certain perimeters. And I can't really get into what those perimeters were, but we had to start saving munitions for different scenarios. So again, I'm going to go back to my A10 comment. The reason why we like the A10 is because it had 30 millimeter, which is just, it's a big ass gun. And there was really no restriction with the 30 millimeter. It could strike onesie, twosie targets. So it wasn't, I don't want to say it was wasting a whole lot of munitions. I mean, we would have liked to use the cheapest munition against these individual people, but there were times where we just couldn't, and then we had to use the only munition available, which could be in upwards of a couple $1,000s, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to get rid of a couple people. So, and then you also have to start thinking about like the concept of putting a price on people's heads. Like, okay, how much is this guy worth? That was a question that we were also always asking each other. It's like, this is a single dude with an AK-47. How much is this guy worth? We only have, I don't know, a $50,000 JDAM available that we could drop. Is he worth that JDAM? Is he worth, the $100,000? I think some variants are cheaper, but like $100,000 Hellfire missile. So, and it all depends on the situation. If it's like an active checkpoint where they are currently taking money away from the civilian population center, or they just got finished executing a bunch of people, then yeah, we'll probably use a Hellfire or two on them. But if it's just like a dude walking around willy nilly, not doing anything, not in any sort of crowded setting or in a crowded setting, sometimes that the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze, or we're still building up intel on that spot and we don't want to scare away the targets. So that was another thing.
Well, actually, let's do Spiggs' question here. This one looks really interesting. Did you ever drop a bomb north of Raqqa in support of the YPG? Perhaps close enough to give me an instant suntan?
You got a date? Now, in support of YPG, no. I don't believe I ever dropped munitions in support of any sort of Kurdish forces. I wasn't part of that. I don't know who did or if they did. The only time that our points were engaged in the vicinity of Kurdish forces was in Kobani. We had so many bombs dropped. It was like at a minimum 1 bomb an hour. Wow. Heavy firefights going on in portions of the city. Bombs are dropping everywhere. Entire streets are being wiped off the map. Like if you look at before and after pictures of Kobani, it is so sad. It's so bad. And there was a lot of ground footage at Kobani too. So you can actually see these firefights occurring and then you just see bombs dropping in the background. Well, that was probably guided by someone from our team, whether it was deployed or stateside. But that was really the only time that we had bombs supporting, or at least in the vicinity of, Kurdish forces. But yes, I've had many bombs drop north of Raqqa, specifically around, I don't know if I could talk about that.
Okay, because he gave me 2015 summer Tel Tamir as the date and location, but if you can't talk about the exact one.
Tel Tamir? Maybe.
I'll take it.
Yeah, so I did do the counter ISIS deal as a targeteer between mid 2014, when we were initially spinning up for Iraq and Syria, all the way up to late 2016. So yeah, and the date that he gave was, you said July 2015?
Summer 2015. So yeah,
summer 2015. So I deployed in the summer of 2015. But if it was a little before mid-July, then yes. Then
okay.
Yeah, we had a couple things operating there. Let's see. Is there any piece of technology or any weapon that you saw that was concerning to you in terms of people potentially misusing it? Good God, that I mean that like I've read the question before, but I haven't really thought of the answer. Misusing bombs. Man, I don't know. I mean, initially when we were firing volleys of cruise missiles into Syria, when we started our counter ISIS campaign in Syria, that was a little weird because we were just firing cruise missiles at just I personally still think it's I don't want to say random shit because they were validated targets. They weren't being weaponeered correctly.
Mm,
Like rather than like weaponeering, for example, like, oh, this building, rather than detonating inside the building and destroying the entire thing, we just airbursted this cruise missile on top of the building and it did nothing. I
mm.
mean, that's an example, but like I mean, misuse it, misuse it intentionally. God, no, I can't think of any. Sorry, I know that was probably not the answer you're looking for, but I don't have I don't have an answer for that. I
Yeah.
don't think we ever misused any
Mm.
that I'm aware of.
Spigs has another one. He said, I didn't have an IR patch on my helmet. How did you differentiate between me and ISIS?
Well, ooh. I mean, we didn't really was it? Somebody fed us the information before we dropped the bomb or before we like planned where the bombs were going to go. Be like, okay, these pockets over there, the Kurds and ISIS are fighting. However, they're using this building way up here to store ammo or like an intelligence headquarters or something like that. So we'd go plink that. Now, the ones that were in very close vicinity to Kurdish forces, I'm pretty sure most of those were done by JTACs. So they have the information. We never really received that information because it was pre planned. Sometimes they were dynamic, but we still had to plan them as if they were pre planned targets because they're structures. Buildings aren't going to move anywhere. The people inside it will move around. So as they're moving around, we have to react quickly to the situation. So ours was always pre planned in advance. It just happened to be close by to y'all. So we couldn't really differentiate y'all. At least we weren't. We didn't have a method for it, but the JTAC sure did.
I do have one more question that's interesting here before the last one.
Okay.
Do you ever think your job could become obsolete with improving technology?
No, there's always going to be a man in the loop to have munitions dropped. I firmly believe that this whole automated robot going around shooting people in the face or dropping bombs autonomously won't happen. Now, by autonomously, that's not to say that we will have drones that fly out to pre-programmed targets, drop their munitions on pre-programmed targets, and then fly back all on their own. I could see that. That might be a thing, especially if it's like a major conflict with like Russia or China or any other major country with a lot of manpower. But as far as like full autonomy, no, no way. That one, that'd be scary as shit.
Yeah.
Two, I mean, you just can't trust that.
Yeah.
You can't have things automatically detecting, like, yes, that is a person with a rifle, shoot them. The whole idea of adding autonomy to military weapons it's frightening because you always hear about it, or I'm sorry, read about it, or even watch it in like movies. Read about it in books, watch it in movies. And God, that better not be a thing. I mean,
Mhm.
I guess you could say the same thing about JDAMs too. They're kind of autonomous. Like we tell them where to go, but in order for them to guide there, they operate independently. So
Right.
there is some sort of autonomy between the weapon system and the intended target. But as far as like the man in the loop, that will always be there.
Your job will get much more efficient, but it will never be autonomized.
Yes. Yep. Yes, that I do agree with.
Yeah. Okay, last question. What is the craziest story you have from the military?
Craziest military story. If it's just in general, okay. I'm gonna go back to my tech school days. So, we're talking about, bombing ISIS and all these airstrikes and shit, and yeah, some of that is interesting, and that could be like the craziest part of my military history. But I'm gonna stay away from that. I'm gonna answer the question from a non-engagement standpoint. So in tech school, we had this MTL or military training leader that was recently like we got there, we got everything set up in our dorms. He was going through a divorce. And so MTLs are basically, I don't want to say downgraded MTIs because that sounds condescending because there were some MTLs that were really good, but MTIs, military training instructors, are essentially drill instructors for the non-military folks, at least for the Air Force. MTLs are the folks that I think they went through that school, but now they're a military training leader at the technical school. So you're out of basic and now you go to your school to learn your trade. Our MTL was going through a divorce, and we are still under the impression that his wife deleted his World of Warcraft account because this dude was so angry. He ended up taking all of us within like I think we were B flight at the time, or Bravo flight. We just called ourselves B1 because it sounds cool. B1 flight out. And he was like, okay, we're going to have a GI party, which for those of you that don't know, a GI party is just like clean everything. And then we're going to white glove inspect it, basically see if there's like any dust. This guy meant take everything out of your room to include like dressers, your entire bed. I'm surprised he didn't say strip the carpet. But we got everything out into the hallway, and we're out there like cleaning our rooms and whatnot. And someone starts blasting this loud ass music, and we get into it like an instant Nerf war up on the third floor of our tech school. I shouldn't say it's really our craziest story, but it's like one of the more memorable, like fun stories that I could talk about. And I think I actually recorded a video of all of us moving our shit onto the hallway, and then we're going around rummaging through people's stuff trying to find like snacks, because of course we're all like 18-year-olds out of high school, and we're like, oh, food. That was probably the funniest and craziest moment of my military career. So I'm craziest as far as like positivity is concerned. Like there was no like, I mean, there's a couple of like negative crazy stories, but from a positive aspect, I think that was our craziest story. Oh, and then a couple nights later, we have a bunch of E7s or senior enlisted folks and above storming our tech school dormitory and searching for contraband, whether it's weapons, drugs, other paraphernalia, you name it. And I was working CQ, or change of quarters duty. So I'm sitting at the front desk, me and one other dude. We have a big old fucking pizza box in front of us, so we're just chilling. It's the middle of the night, I think 1 a.m, and you see like the dimly lit light from our building stretches out toward the main road, and we're just kind of like just staring ahead because we don't have any TV. And you see you see this weird movement, like this weird shadowy movement walking up to the door, and it spanned the entire like door. It was a double door, and it was just like this bunch of walking shadows. We're like, what the fuck is that? And so we stand up because we're anticipating that it's senior military advisors or military leaders, and they were all E7s and above. There was about 50 of them. One of them comes in and he points at me and he says, push the button, which there's a bunch of buttons lined up on my side, one for fire, one for tornado, and one for, I forgot what it was. I didn't know which button to push, so I kind of smashed all 3 of them. And so as I'm smashing in these buttons, this intercom comes on. It's like fire, tornado, earthquake, or some shit like that. And it just kept saying that, like, please, evacuate and get into a low area. And so people are being woken up at 1 in the morning. And so they start tossing people's rooms. They start off with the first floor and they start bringing all the stuff out. So anything that's contraband, they'll put on the front desk of the CQ desk. And I remember they brought out this bag of, it looked like marijuana. It looked like marijuana. It was very convincing. And then one of the MTLs just straight up opened it, put his nose in it, and took the biggest sniff. And he's like, oh, I think it's oregano. And he put it down. There's some kid that straight up took like tea leaves and spices and put them in individual baggies. And they found one. I thought it was marijuana, but it was like oregano, like crushed up oregano. And then another one came by the desk and threw something really, really hard on the desk. Like it made a thump. It wasn't a hollow desk, but it was heavy. And we looked at it and we realized it was like a 2-foot long dildo. So turns out you cannot have any sort of like that kind of paraphernalia in there. But it was like one of those double-ended. It was black and it was freaking massive.
Jesus Christ.
It's like Cocaine Dan comes swinging in and just threw that shit down on the table. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, they had to have, please tell me they got that as a joke just to get it, because they knew there was going to be room inspections. They were pulling out all sorts of wild shit out of people's dorm room. One of them, they ended up pulling out all of these filled 2-liter bottles of this unknown liquid. We didn't know what it was, but there's, I think, 10 of them lined up on the desk. And eventually I asked one of the MTLs, I was like, sir, do you know what those are? And he's like, that's dip spit. Like, oh my God, some dude is hoarding dip spit in his closet. He's being so fucking lazy and not throwing it in the garbage. So one, Intel Tech School is filled with nerds and freaks. So that was one of the, oh, and then I went back up to my room because they wanted me to unlock my wall locker because I was down at CQ. So they were like, I could come back up. And I see my, at the time, roommate was standing outside the door and he was holding a wig in his hand. And I remember the MTL that was searching his room was like, "What the fuck is that wig for?" And he was like, "Oh, it's for when I feel extra sassy, sir." And like the straightest face ever. I'd never oh god, I laughed so fucking hard. That MTL was not having it though. He was pissed. But that, I mean, tech school is crazy. I loved it and hated it at the same time. It's the most fun you never want to have again. So sorry, bit of a long answer, but that was like my craziest positive moment in the Air Force.
Beautiful. Yeah. It sounds like just military rowdy ass college.
Yeah, it really is.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking about all of this with me. It was awesome to have you. And once again, I felt like this went by so fast. It's amazing how well you can just like keep it going. So thank you.
Take care.